Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This all went down in 2019 when I landed a sweet gig as a video producer for Miller State University. The pay wasn't amazing, like $3,500 a month, but content creation was still a budding field back then. On my second day, my boss Carol handed me this insane goal: crank out 85 videos ranging from 3 to 10 minutes each within 52 weeks. Just me, a one-man crew, handling every aspect from scripting to editing. I voiced my concerns, but Carol brushed them off, saying quality trumped quantity. Wanting to make it work, I invested in my own pro-grade gear and editing suite since the university's equipment was ancient. The first month was smooth sailing until Carol found out I was a smoker. Her attitude did a total 180, constantly nagging me about cigarette odors, my occasional tardiness despite burning the midnight oil, you name it. I powered through, determined to excel. 5 months in, Carol set up a meeting with the marketing director, Janet. I could sense it was going south when Carol flashed that smug grin. Janet expressed disappointment that I'd only completed 30 of the 85 videos at the halfway mark. I pleaded my case, emphasizing the monumental workload for a solo operator and the record-breaking view counts on my videos. I even reminded them that Carol had prioritized quality, but they weren't having it. That's when Carol piped up about finding a professional production company to wrap up my workload. A light bulb went off. I maintained a database of local production firms for potential partnerships. Before my exit, I corrupted all the contacts except one, my buddy Greg's fledgling company. I looped Greg in on a devious scheme, help him land the university gig, and he'd pay me a 15% finder's fee from their windfall. Greg's team studied my inside knowledge and knocked the pitch out of the park, immediately scoring the contract. Even back then, production companies didn't come cheap. Greg's rates were easily double my monthly salary per video, factoring in dedicated crew roles, but they could bang out a new video every couple of days. Long story short, Greg's team pumped out 50 crisp videos over 4 months, totaling well over a year's worth of my salary. I pocketed that juicy 15% finder's fee, covering a luxurious Bali getaway with enough left over for film school, but the icing on the cake? My former coworker clued me in. Carol got straight up fired, while Janet faced the chancellor's wrath. Turns out the project's original budget was just 18 months of my salary, but Carol greenlighted a massive overspend, like 10 times that, to save face with Janet. She gambled big and lost hard. So I helped my buddy level up professionally, took home a year's pay, and got the last laugh as my terrible boss went down in flames. All's well that ends well. The next one is an entitled people story. I've lived in my cozy little suburban neighborhood for over 15 years now. It's one of those quiet streets where everyone knows each other and we all get along for the most part. That is, until Karen moved in next door about a year ago. From the moment she arrived, it was obvious she was going to be trouble. Karen waltzed in like she owned the place, complaining about every little thing she could find wrong with her new home and yard. Our houses are spaced nicely apart, but she wasn't satisfied with the distance between us. She demanded I cut down the beautiful willow tree in my backyard because it was blocking her view. Yeah, right. More like blocking her ability to spy on me through the windows. I politely declined cutting down my tree when she asked. Well, that was when the real nightmare began. Suddenly, Karen began calling the homeowner association multiple times a day, fabricating crazy complaints to try and get me fined. She claimed I was running an illegal business from my home. I work from home part-time doing freelance writing. She said my kids were peeking in her windows. They're toddlers who can barely walk. No matter how many times the homeowner association dismissed her ludicrous claims, she just became more unhinged. Karen's irrational vendetta against me went to disturbing new levels when she poisoned my lawn. That's right. In the middle of the night, this deranged woman trespassed onto my property and poured chemicals all over my grass, killing it within days. I caught her on my security cameras and filed a police report, but they said there wasn't enough evidence to press charges. At that point, I realized I needed to take matters into my own hands. If the authorities wouldn't stop Karen's crusade of petty harassment, I would find a way to fight back on my terms. An idea struck me one day as I glanced out the window and saw her glowering from her porch. What if I gave her exactly what she wanted, the ability to monitor my every move? I erected an enormous surveillance tower at the edge of my property, with multiple large cameras pointing directly at Karen's house. It was impossible for her to leave without being caught on video. I even splurged on extra powerful microphones to pick up every little sound. The look of horror and outrage on Karen's face when she saw my new home security system was priceless. She came storming over, yelling about her privacy being invaded. I calmly informed her that we have no reasonable expectation of privacy when in our yards or coming-going from our homes. Those were her exact words to me when defending her obsessive spying. I was simply securing my property from a potentially dangerous neighbor. Karen flipped out. She called the police and the homeowner association daily, demanding the cameras be removed immediately. They told her there was nothing unlawful about what I'd done. As long as the equipment stayed on my property, I had every right to point it wherever I pleased. Driven mad by my taste of her own medicine, Karen became more and more unhinged. She took to sitting in her yard for hours, glaring at the cameras and trying to obscure them with trees, umbrellas, or sheets hung from cords. Nothing deterred my surveillance system. Eventually, Karen snapped. One afternoon, while I was at the grocery store, she took a baseball bat and smashed one of my cameras to pieces. Too bad for her. Destroying property is very much against the law. I called the police and showed them the video footage of her going ballistic on my equipment. Karen was charged with destruction of property and also violating the restraining order I had finally been granted against her. Instead of leaving the neighborhood like any normal person, Karen doubled down. She insisted she was innocent and that I was the real criminal for antagonizing her. The case went before a judge, who also viewed my security footage as evidence. It clearly showed Karen terrorizing me for months before I installed the cameras that sent her into an unprovoked bat-swinging rage. When the verdict came down fully in my favor, ordering Karen to pay all my legal fees, damages, and a hefty fine, she broke down in the courtroom. As the bailiff dragged her sobbing, hysterical form away, she kept screaming about how I had ruined her life. Last I heard, she had to sell her house and declare bankruptcy just to attempt to pay a fraction of what she owed me. My cameras caught the whole pathetic ordeal as the moving trucks carted away all of her possessions. I finally have my peaceful little neighborhood back, free of the entitled neighbor from hell. And you can bet I'm keeping those cameras rolling, just in case any other Karens get tempted to move onto our street. After all, malicious compliance has always been my specialty. The next one is a petty revenge story. The backstory is that I have an annoying cousin, Louise, aka Poo-Covered Lou, who is heavily into competitive child raising and off-roading her 4WD in my front garden. She's no longer allowed on our property. I don't speak directly to Lou anymore, but I do speak to her mum, Auntie Dot. And my fiancé, Martin, is friends with Lou's husband, Mike. I don't work on Thursdays, so I was still getting dressed when I heard a car and some voices. My cat sprinted off the bed and hid in the bathroom about a nanosecond before my cousin's Wonder Kids, 8M and 6F, burst in. I have no idea why they weren't at school. My fiancé was just behind them looking a bit panicked. Very unusual state for him. Apparently, Louise had to take Auntie Dot to the hospital and urgently needed someone to look after the kids. Martin, being the compassionate soul that he is, agreed. So, we spent the morning looking after the Wonder Kids and our own Vampira, nearly 2F, and she vanced to gnaw your broccoli. Just after lunch, healthy and nutritious, Martin tried ringing Lou to get a progress report. No answer. No biggie. They were in a hospital. But he thought he'd try ringing Lou's husband, Mike, to see if he'd heard anything. Turned out Mike had no idea the kids were with us. They were supposed to be with his mum. The hospital visit was an outpatient clinic for Louise, not an urgent trip for Auntie Dot as implied. Auntie Dot was there for moral support. Mike offered to come and collect the Wonder Kids, but since he's self-employed and was working on a site about 2 hours away, we agreed to keep the Wonder Kids for the rest of the day. Mike rang back and said Louise would collect the kids at 5 p.m. I was fuming. Poo-Covered Lou had lied and taken advantage and managed to worm her way back in. So I decided to play dirty. Literally. I took the Wonder Kids for a walk to the park, while Martin took our youngest to do some shopping. It was a nice winter's day, and the kids ran around, fell over, climbed on all the play equipment, jumped in all the muddy puddles, and found a heap of treasures, and put them in their pockets to show their mum. We did wash faces and hands afterwards and cleaned shoes as best we could, but Lou hadn't provided a change of clothing. So by the time she arrived at 6 p.m., on time for her, the Wonder Kids were tired, happy, hungry, and absolutely filthy and keen to show off their treasures. Louise, on the other hand, was not happy, and made the Wonder Kids leave their treasures on the nature strip, dirtying their hands again. Then when the kids were strapped into their car seats, it was time to enact the final part of my petty revenge. Martin produced the shopping I'd asked him to get and gave them a paper bag each. I explained they were a little treat for the journey home to tide them over. Inside each bag was a sweet bun, known in our house as instant diabetes. They are filled with strawberry jam, iced with gooey pink icing, and liberally dusted with desiccated coconut. According to my dad, by the time they reached home, the Wonder Kids were covered in jam and icing as well as dirt, and they didn't want dinner. My kids ate their veggies, Lou. The back seat of Lou's car was also covered in dirty, sticky fingerprints and coconut. Apparently Lou's not happy, and even though she's vacuumed, she's still finding little shreds of coconut in the back seat. And oh dearie me, so sad. We're never allowed to look after her kids ever again. Ever. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I'm a customer services manager for a very large entertainment/broadband company. Part of my job is listening to calls raised off to by my agents in relations to complaints, etc. One of my agents had a customer on the line going mental about her daughter's phone and broadband services being restricted for not paying. Customer claims the last person she spoke to said her bill would be cleared and she didn't have to pay, so I listened to that call, and the customer is awful from the get-go. Making fun of the advisor's name, the name being Merlin, she was making jokes about her being a wizard and how stupid her name was mainly. Shouting at her for over an hour about how we've committed fraud because we won't read her daughter's bank details out on the call to her. She then starts going mad when the advisor tells her we couldn't take payment because 3 different credit cards were declined on the account in 3 different months. Abuse goes on for 1h45 minds, and I feel so bad for the advisor at this point. Customer starts going mental that her daughter never has credit cards, again that we've committed fraud, and she's coming to the agent's call center to find her. When the agent asks how we could possibly have committed fraud, the customer puts her foot in it, goes into a rage, and then tells her she let her daughter, who's only 17, go into the store and take the broadband contract with us, and the customer knew she had to be over 18, how it was our fault, and blah blah for not doing our checks and so on. Her daughter came on the line screaming just as bad as her too. Our customers need to be 18 plus to have contracts with us. We run basic debt checks to see if they have defaulted accounts with us, but nothing more. After raising the account off to the fraud team, I had the pleasure of calling them back to tell them they were canceled with immediate effect. Of course, she started screaming at me. Until I told her I wasn't here to be screamed at, it clearly wasn't up for discussion and that I'd be hanging up. If she'd been nice and not acted like she was on a pedestal and untouchable, then the services wouldn't have been canceled. Don't you love when loudmouthed Karens shoot themselves in the foot? The next one is an entitled people's story. Just felt like writing this up for everybody to enjoy. This happened to my best friend, M, somewhere early 30s at that point, about 10 years ago. We'll call him Mark. It happened in Germany. Mark lived in a small apartment building somewhat on the very edge of a large town, but this area was more like a small town or village. Many families, basically no one passing through. The apartment building held 6 apartments with Mark living in one, his sister in another, his mother in another, and 3 apartments rented by other people. Also, Mark had been raised in this building, and at that point he had been living there his whole life. Mark loved to, and still does, ride a racing bike. He is an avid cyclist in general, doing much of his early life on a bike for which he has the everyday sort of bike with a basket, etc. Yet he also has owned several very expensive, sometimes custom-made racing bikes over the years on which he spent much of his weekends. Enter a neighbor who had been living there a while, M, around 40. We will call him Dave. Dave had a second-hand bike, a sturdy one but missing some care. At one point, Dave decided that he actually did not need that bike anymore, but there were 2 boys living some houses away, 8, 12 or around that, who had to share one bicycle, so Dave went out to them and told them that he had a bike left, which he had not been using for quite a while. He told them it might be a bit dusty and the tires might be flat, that's what he explained later, and that they can have it, no strings attached except for that they had to get it from his seller, and of course tell their parents about this so there would not be any trouble. He went with them back to the house then, unlocked the door, showed them where to get into the cellar, then left for work. Some hours later, my friend Mark comes home from work and sees 2 boys he knows from his neighborhood on bikes, one of which is clearly his rather expensive, say €250,000 racing bike. He stops them in the road and demands they hand over his bike. They don't want to, claiming it's theirs and that it was a present from neighbor Dave. Mark tells them that it certainly was not, because this bike belongs to him, not Dave. Hence, Dave can't have gifted it to them. They call him a liar and want to take off with the bike, but Mark holds firm to the handlebar and tells them he will call the police if they do not hand over the bike this very instant. The boys get scared and run away with their own bike. Mark takes his bike back to his apartment, checks it, and finds that the boys obviously used it like it was a mountain bike, so he knew he had to repair some things and it would probably be costly. He hears Dave coming home, they lived on the same floor, leaves his apartment and tells Dave about what happened. Dave is very embarrassed and apologetic and assures Mark that he specifically told the boys that his bike was an older model, dusty and probably with flat tires, and that he has absolutely no idea they could mistake his bike for a brand new gleaming racing bike. The thing that most likely happened was, the boys entered the cellar after Dave had let them. The bicycles were all in a room down there, but this is an old building. There was nothing to lock them to, and after living in that place for so many years and never having a single issue of any foul play, Mark had never thought about locking his bikes together or putting a lock around wheel and frame or something. Down there, however, the boys were in the midst of some bikes, many of which might have been too tall, or looked like a woman's, or just didn't meet their taste. Ignoring Dave's explanation of how the bike they were gifted would look, the boys decided to take the only bike from down there. That was definitely very new and flashing, and that was definitely by far the best horse in the stable. One could have ended the tale here, if entitled kids were not often met by entitled parents. Because on the same evening, the boy's dad showed up, demanding that Mark hand over the bicycle his boys had been gifted. Mark tried to explain what most likely had happened, phrasing it that the boys mistook the bicycles, but Dad did not listen. Once they were down in the cellar accompanied by Dave, who did his best to explain too, Mark and Dave pointed out the gifted bike, only for Dad to say, "No, that is not it. Where is the racing bike?" They explained again. Dad still demanded the racing bike. They explained again. Dad said that he did not buy their story. His sons had been gifted a racing bike and they would get it this very moment or Dad would call the police. That's when both Mark and Dave started laughing and kicked him out, but not without the information that Mark's bike was not only registered with the police and the manufacturer as his, not Dave's, but also insured under his name. Hence, Dave could not have gifted the bike to the boys, but that they would look forward to Dad calling the police, because that would end with Mark reporting his boys for theft and for damaging his bike and their father for coercion. Dad left in a hurry. After fixing the damages on his bike, Mark put an envelope into the family's mailbox, detailing the costs, if I recall correctly it was around 300 euros, and writing that children make mistakes and that he will not demand the money back, but to let this be a warning to Dad to think about his behavior. The following years in which the family lived down the road, the boys and father would make sure to avoid Mark, and if they could not, they greeted him very nicely, but never looked him in the eye. The next one is an entitled parents story. After telling some stories about my past, I have now brought all of you to the present. And by the present, I mean yesterday. So, technically still in the past, my head hurts. Anyway, I was walking home from a friend's house, and on the way back I was walking close to the curb, but not exactly next to it. I wasn't focusing since I was listening to music, and suddenly I saw a car go onto part of the pavement, and the side mirror hit me in the gut, and it hurt bad. I was trying to catch my breath by leaning on the wall opposite, and that's when she stepped out of her car, showing all her ugly glory. The conversation went as follows. "EM, what do you think you're doing?" Me, coughing. You hit me with your car." "EM, you broke my side mirror. You have to pay for that." Me, "You went onto the pavement, hit me with it, and you expect me to pay?" That's when she walked up to me and punched me in my gut, right where she hit me with her car. Punched me multiple times, rings and all. I swear I coughed up blood. She then noticed my phone and tries to take it. "EM, if you're not gonna pay, I'll just take you phone and bracelet as compensation." This crossed the line. My phone is one thing, but my bracelet is another. That bracelet holds so much value to me. Those who have been reading my stories for a while know that I'm trans, and this http://imgur.com/gallery/anh8vuq bracelet is one that I got from my parents while they were in Tunisia, and it says Laura in Arabic. I love this bracelet. I resisted as much as I could, all the while screaming, and that's when I saw another woman, who will be known as Hero, push her away from me. "EM, he took my daughter's phone and bracelet from her. I saw her daughter in the car. She could not be older than 8. And again, misgendering me. Hero, I saw everything." Turns to me. "Are you okay?" Me, still coughing. "I think so. Although I did cough up blood not too long ago." Hero, "What's your name?" Me, Laura. Hero, "I'll call an ambulance." Turns to EM. "I suggest you leave before I make you." EM, "But Hero, now." The EM left. I went to the hospital. I didn't have any serious injuries, but she left a massive purple bruise on my stomach. While at the hospital, Hero said that she took a pic of her registration plate and will report her to the police. We exchanged phone numbers and she stayed with me until I could leave the hospital, which was late last night. Still feeling in pain, but it's not as bad as what it was. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.